Hello and welcome to the unseen question. There's a quiet shift happening. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a steady rethinking, a recalibration of beliefs once held sacred. It's not coming from rebellion or anger or even science alone. It's coming from a deeper question that many are only just beginning to ask seriously. What kind of world are we actually living in? If we take the evidence at face value? For a long time, belief systems held their ground not because they were irrefutable, but because they were protected by tradition, by fear, by social norms, and by a kind of psychological insulation. But today, that insulation is thinning. And what's taking its place isn't some aggressive campaign to destroy belief. It's something simpler, more disruptive. People are starting to ask better questions. Let's look at three of the most powerful and largely under-discussed arguments that are shifting faith today. The first comes not from physics or philosophy, but from ethics. It's called the Moral Outsourcing Argument. Here's what it asks. If divine morality is real, why do we keep having to override it? Think about it. Every major moral advance in modern history, from abolition to civil rights to gender equality to LGBTQ+ acceptance, happened not because religion led the way, but because secular voices pushed forward against deeply held religious objections. And then, once those ideas became mainstream, religious institutions retrofitted their interpretations to accommodate them. That's not just a pattern. It's a problem. If a timeless, perfect source of moral truth exists, why does it consistently lag behind evolving human empathy? Why do churches update their teachings only after society forces their hand? This isn't just cherry-picking. It's structural. From the defense of slavery using scripture, to the burning of heretics, to opposition to women's rights, it's always the same story. Religious morality follows. It doesn't lead. And more people are noticing that the moral compass we trust, the one that tells us slavery is wrong, that genocide isn't excusable, that love isn't sinful, doesn't seem to come from doctrine. It comes from somewhere else entirely. We recognize harm. We adapt to minimize it. We expand our circles of empathy. None of that requires belief in a deity. And increasingly, people are seeing that belief often gets in the way. The second argument gaining quiet traction is what some call the divine coincidence problem. It's this: almost without exception, people believe in the version of God that just happens to match their geography. A baby born in Cairo will likely believe in Allah. One born in Salt Lake City, Jesus. One in Mumbai, Shiva. It's a near-perfect predictor. Not divine truth. Location. And here's where it gets interesting. The more exposure people have to other worldviews, through education, travel, internet access, the more their beliefs shift or soften. Religious belief turns out to be deeply cultural, not cosmic. That doesn't disprove anything, but it does raise an obvious question. If belief is so deeply tied to accident of birth, why should anyone assume their version is the correct one? It's like being born into a company town and swearing the company store has the best prices in the world, never checking outside. And yet, when people do check, what they often find isn't just difference. It's contradiction. One religion's core truth is another's heresy. One's prophet is another's false teacher. One's holy book is another's fiction. So how can people still claim to know their faith is true, when their confidence would be exactly the same if they'd been born elsewhere? This realization doesn't come like a thunderclap. It's more like a slow erosion, but it's changing minds. And the third argument, maybe the most quietly devastating, is something you don't hear in debates or theology classes. It's psychological. It's called the cognitive fragmentation problem. It goes like this. People of faith routinely compartmentalize. They use one standard of thinking when navigating the real world, and a completely different one when engaging with religious ideas. In everyday life, we demand evidence, consistency, and coherence. But when it comes to faith, we often suspend those demands. We teach children not to trust strangers, but tell them to trust an unseen being who watches everything they do. We tell adults to get second opinions, question authority, do their own research, but not when it comes to the most consequential claims about the universe. We'd never accept this double standard in any other part of life, and increasingly, people are starting to feel the strain of that dissonance. They notice how the very methods they use to stay safe, to make decisions, to understand reality, are the same methods they're asked to abandon when faith is involved. And it's no longer convincing. The more people reflect on that mental split, the more it starts to feel less like faith, and more like a habit they were trained not to question. And when someone finally steps back, looks at the whole picture, how they think in the rest of life versus how they're told to think about religion, that fragmentation becomes hard to ignore. It's not just inconvenient. It feels dishonest. Not because people are lying, but because they're living in two different mental systems and pretending they're the same. And here's something else. If a belief system were truly rooted in reality, wouldn't it hold up to the same level of scrutiny we expect from medicine or journalism or even a weather report? Wouldn't it get stronger the more we question it? Instead, what we see is the opposite. Doubt is framed as weakness. Skepticism is framed as sin. Asking for clarity is seen as a lack of faith. And in almost no other part of life is that considered a virtue. That's where the shift is happening. Quietly, persistently, and often invisibly, people aren't waking up one day and losing their faith like it's some dramatic event. They're simply realizing that the tools they use to understand everything else work just as well when applied to belief. And the results don't favor the narrative they were raised with. Another factor pushing this shift is one we rarely talk about: the data gap between prayer and outcomes. Studies on intercessory prayer, praying for someone else's health or well-being, have been done multiple times. And the results are striking. When conducted under controlled conditions, prayer has shown no statistically significant impact on recovery. In fact, in one of the most well-known studies, patients who knew they were being prayed for actually did slightly worse. And while people often respond by saying, "God doesn't work that way," that's exactly the problem. There's no standard, no mechanism, no measurable effect. Prayer outcomes match what you'd expect from random chance, not divine intervention. And when that's the case, it's hard to keep claiming it as a reliable path to truth. But maybe the most overlooked aspect of this whole conversation is what we could call the disempowerment cost. It's not about whether belief is wrong, but about what it takes from people. When someone's told their struggles are part of a divine plan, or that suffering builds character, or that justice will be served in the next life, not this one, something subtle happens. Their sense of agency begins to erode. They're encouraged to accept rather than challenge, to endure rather than act, to wait for help rather than demand it. And over time, that has consequences, especially in communities where religion plays a central role in shaping social norms and personal identity. Belief systems that frame hardship as God's will can make people more passive in the face of injustice. They may stop asking why inequality exists, or whether the systems around them are broken, because they're taught to see those things as tests, not problems. And when that mindset becomes ingrained, it doesn't just affect individuals. It shapes entire cultures. Cultures where critical thinking is discouraged, where obedience is rewarded, where doubt is feared instead of explored. And that matters, because the real world, the one we all live in regardless of belief, runs on cause and effect, not divine approval. If the crops fail, it's not because someone sinned. It's because of weather patterns, soil conditions, maybe climate change. If a loved one dies, it's not punishment. It's biology. It's randomness. It's the fragility of life. And while those answers may feel colder, they're not without meaning. They point us toward things we can change, improve, understand. They give us tools, not just comfort. And that's where a lot of people are quietly moving, away from stories that ask for loyalty and toward frameworks that ask for responsibility. They're realizing that a world without divine oversight isn't a tragedy. It's a challenge. A world where no one's coming to save us, but also no one's stopping us. That shift from submission to ownership is more than philosophical. It's existential, and explains why, even in places where religion was once untouchable, belief is starting to thin. Not in every demographic, not in every country, but enough to see the trend. Young people in particular are leaving formal religion at higher rates than ever recorded. They're not turning toward anything dramatic. They're just walking away. Because when you stack the promises of faith against the actual outcomes of the real world, the story stops making sense. And when a story stops making sense, people don't rage against it. They just stop telling it. That doesn't mean they stop asking big questions. It just means they stop pretending that the old answers are enough. They still wonder where we came from, what consciousness is, whether anything exists beyond death. But they're okay admitting what they don't know, instead of reaching for what feels safe. And that's not cynicism. It's clarity. They're not replacing religion with bitterness, or emptiness, or shallow materialism. They're replacing it with curiosity, responsibility, and something that doesn't get talked about enough, humility. Because real humility isn't saying, I'm nothing without God. It's saying, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to keep asking better questions. And that posture, open, honest, unguarded, is what allows for real progress. It's what makes science possible. What drives social reform? What pushes us to examine our assumptions instead of defending them? And maybe that's the most hopeful part of this whole shift. That for the first time in a long time, more people are realizing they don't need certainty to live meaningful lives. They don't need cosmic permission to be moral. They don't need divine surveillance to stay kind. They don't need a final judgment to know right from wrong, because the tools for that are already inside us. Our empathy, our logic, our capacity to imagine someone else's suffering, to care about it, and to try to reduce it. That doesn't require scripture, or salvation, or fear. It just requires honesty. And that kind of honesty can be uncomfortable, especially when it means letting go of beliefs that shaped your childhood, your identity, maybe even your sense of safety. But what's waiting on the other side isn't a void. It's a new way of seeing, one where the universe is big and strange and sometimes painful, but not meaningless. One where purpose doesn't have to be assigned from above. It can be built from the ground up in the work we do, the people we love, the choices we make. And that's why the arguments we've explored, moral outsourcing, divine coincidence, cognitive fragmentation, aren't just intellectual. They're personal. They challenge us not just to think differently, but to live differently, to stop outsourcing meaning and start crafting it ourselves, to stop following sacred scripts and start writing our own pages, and to recognize that even without a higher power, there's something powerful about being human, not because we were made in someone's image, but because we are capable of imagining something better and then working together to make it real. That's not a loss. That's a beginning.